10 cold killers who made the mistake of representing themselves. Welcome back to Creepshow, the channel where we dive deep into the darkest corners of the human psyche. Today, we're uncovering some chilling stories about killers who thought they were smarter than the system, but made one huge mistake. They decided to represent themselves in court. From serial killers to mass murderers, these individuals let their egos get the better of them, and it cost them dearly. Grab a seat, because these stories are as shocking as they are tragic. Let's get into 10 cold killers who made the mistake of representing themselves. Number 10. Rodney Alcala. Serial killer Rodney Alcala, sometimes known as the dating game killer, felt he was smart enough to persuade a jury of his innocence with an IQ of 170. During his twisted murdering rampage that claimed at least 8 female victims in the 1970s, he starred on a dating game show. One believes the total victim count may be far higher. Alcala chose to cross-examine himself in the third person, in addition to personally representing himself throughout the murder trial. In court, he questioned himself in a much deeper voice than usual. "Rodney, will you kindly tell us about your hair?" he proceeded. "Okay, Mr. Alcala, can you tell us what you did on June 15? He answered in a higher-pitched voice following every inquiry. The court found all to be rather perplexing. Judge Francisco Bracino of Orange County Superior Court labeled the circumstances as a tad awkward. Alcala was sentenced to death third time in 2010, following many retrials. Number 10. Ted Bundy. Strong letters of recommendation from his psychology instructors led to Ted Bundy's admission into law school at the University of Utah in 1973. Serial murderer 6 years later, upon accusations of several murders, he would serve as his own defense lawyer. From attorney Polly Nelson, author of Defining the Devil, My Story, as Ted Bundy's last lawyer said, "Bundy undermined the entire defense effort out of spite, distrust, and grandiose delusion. With a possible death sentence and murder charges against Ted, all that seemed important to him seemed to be that he be in charge." Bundy was led into the prison library so he could investigate his matter of business. He leapt from the window to freedom, managing to flee. Bundy had already flown to Chicago and then headed to Florida by the time he was detained. 2 students perished, and he attacked 4 others in a Florida State University sorority home. Enough victim testimony would get the filthy killer behind bars. He was executed by electric chair on January 24, 1989. Number 8. Dylann Roof. Mass killer and white supremacist Dylann Roof fired during a prayer session at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. He killed 9 African Americans. Roof said that if he had killed folks in a black area, nobody would have paid attention. He thereby engaged in a crime even more clearly racist. He chose to represent himself and turned down the defense claiming he was on the autism spectrum during his sentencing phase of his trial. "Could you explain that to me? Being labeled autistic is worse than death," said District Judge Richard Gergel. Roof said, "Because once you've got that label, there's no point in living anyway." Roof stayed immobile in court and simply gazed straight ahead during very traumatic events in the trial, including survivor testimony. He has been on execution row since 2017. A jury barely needed 2 hours to decide he was guilty. Number 7. William Richard Bradford. William Richard Bradford killed barmaid Shari Miller and neighbor Tracy Campbell, who was 15 years old, in 1984. Claiming to be a professional photographer able to assist with their modeling portfolios, Bradford enticed both women to meet their deaths. He discharged the dead bodies after strangling them till they perished. He opted to fire his attorney throughout his trial. Bradford did not, however, present any proof of his innocence throughout trial. Bradford said, "Think of how many you don't even know about," when the prosecution asserted he was a serial killer with numerous additional unidentified victims. You really are correct. That is it. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. Bradford's apartment turned up a set of pictures that the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department discovered in 2006. Investigators think these are the last pictures of his unidentified victims, as 54 women seem to be models. Bradford died of cancer behind prison in 2008. He carried the truth to his tomb. Number 6. Nidal Hasan. United States Army Medical Corps psychiatrist former Major Nidal Hasan acknowledged to killing 13 persons and injuring more than 30 others in the Fort Hood mass shooting in 2009. Hasan chose to represent himself at trial so he could challenge the troops he had harmed during the attack. Judge Colonel Tara Osborne decided he was mentally fit for a trial. She cautioned him, though, that he clearly had a disadvantage since he was facing a senior prosecutor with almost 20 years of experience. "You've made that quite clear," Hasan said. He was not ready to have his viewpoint changed, though. Attorney for the relatives of the slain victims in the massacre, Reed Rubenstein, claimed that Hasan's questioning of individuals he had harmed was unethical. "He's mocking the court system," Rubenstein added. Hasan's jury in 2013 suggested the death sentence. It was a contentious conclusion, since the shooting was categorized as workplace violence rather than terrorism. Number 5. Colin Ferguson. 6 persons were killed and 19 others were injured at the Marylawn Avenue station in Garden City, New York, by mass killer Colin Ferguson in 1993. Ferguson quietly strolled down the aisle, then started firing at the other passengers with a Ruger P85 9mm pistol as the train drew into the station. Well-educated Jamaican immigrant Ferguson stated that an unknown white man had escaped and was behind the shootings. He chose to represent himself after firing his defensive counsel. He also received county money to pay for a private investigator looking for the real killer. Speaking in third person, Ferguson said to the court, "Mr. Ferguson was awakened by the gunfire. Among the confusion, sought to protect himself. I saw you shooting everyone on the train, okay?" One witness he had shot in the back responded when asked to identify the gunman. Found guilty, he was sentenced to 315 years and 8 months to life. Number 4. Jonathan Allen Muhammad. In the 2000 D.C. sniper actions, John Allen Muhammad and his 17-year-old friend Lee Boyd Melvo killed 10 people and injured numerous others. Muhammad left notes for the police at crime spots during the 8-month killing frenzy. Apart from the $10 million demand, one observation noted, "For you, Mr. Police, talk to me, God." Officers could match a dropped magazine they found to Melvo's fingerprints on file. Muhammad was allowed to represent himself. He changed his mind, though, when he realized the death sentence was most likely result after his opening case. Former soldier turned mechanic claimed he killed people in order to get money from the police. He intended to move to Canada with his 3 estranged kids using the money. 2009 saw him offered the option to be executed either by electrocution or lethal injection. Lethal injection was chosen for him when he turned down the opportunity to decide on a technique. Muhammad was put to death at the Virginia Prison Greensville Correctional Center, close to Jarrett. Number 3. Waseem Daker. Waseem Daker, maker of death prosecutors during Waseem Daker's trial. The cold-blooded killer had a former conviction for stalking Loretta Spencer Blatz. Daker stabbed to death Blatz's roommate, Carmen Smith, in 1995, as he felt she was interfering with his relationship. When Daker got home from school, he also stabbed 5-year-old son of Smith. Fortunately, the lad made it through the vicious onslaught. Cobb County Superior Court Judge Mary Staley cautioned Daker, who decided to defend himself at trial. "You're choosing to expose yourself to risk. That is your decision, though, not mine." He was allowed to dress in civilian attire during the trial, so as to avoid biasing the jurors against him. He was not permitted, however, to handle the blades that prosecutors intended to provide as proof. Daker was convicted and sentenced to life plus 47.5 years behind bars following the 2 weeks of testimony. Number 2. Zacarias Moussaoui. Although Zacarias Moussaoui enrolled as a pilot in a flying school in 2001, he was not licensed. Months later, he was detained on immigration charges following a Minnesota flight school's suspicions about his request to study flying Boeing 747s. The 9/11 attacks then took place, and Moussaoui was held as a material witness. Charged with 6 conspiracy counts and headed toward the death sentence, he decided to represent himself. Moussaoui entered a guilty plea in 2005 to all 6 felony charges, including conspiracy to commit acts of terrorism spanning national lines, conspiracy to utilize weapons of mass destruction, and conspiracy to murder United States employees. The jurors turned down the death sentence. Moussaoui instead got 6 life sentences without parole in the federal ADX Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. He clasped his hands together and yelled, "America, you lost," as he was guided from the courtroom. "I shall win." Number 1. Charles Manson. Though the court was reluctant, Charles Manson was approved in 1969 to represent himself during his trial for the savage killings of 6 other victims, including Sharon Tate, who had been 8 months pregnant. Manson was flaunting the trial, according to Judge George Dell. "There's a practical limit to what the court will put up with," Dell said. There was a first appointment of a public defender. Then an internationally well-known criminal attorney was assigned to meet with Mr. Manson, who unequivocally showed he could not represent himself. Another outstanding criminal lawyer was appointed, he said, but Mr. Manson decided to choose still another attorney, and he picked the attorney with the least experience in Los Angeles County. Manson was convicted in 1971 of 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder and 7 counts of first-degree murder. His term was death. Nevertheless, the death sentence was dropped soon after the decision, and his punishment was modified to life in prison. At 83, he passed away in a jail in 2017. That's it for today's episode on Creepshow. These cases serve as a reminder that no matter how smart or manipulative these killers thought they were, justice has a way of catching up with them. If you enjoyed this dive into criminal minds, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Let us know in the comments which case left you the most shocked. And as always, stay safe and curious. Until next time on Creepshow.